Hello, welcome to Module 2, Lesson 4. We're still talking about the lifeline, and this is an exciting video. We have branch lines, we got talking about changes in direction, the island, locations of the island, lots of other marks on the lifeline, including tassels and faded section. And I also have two examples at the end, very exciting. Let's move on. So the first thing we are talking about is the branch lines, and particularly a branch line that goes, here's a close-up, here's the lifeline around the thumb, the branch lines that go drooping on the inside. The drooping branch line on the inside of the lifeline, sometimes called the line of loss, can be physical, like losing a home, or it can be emotional, like losing a loved one. But it can mainly represent a direction because it is a split line, so there's a change, potentially change in direction. Person might be feeling on the inside that it's time for a change. Obviously, we need to look at the other lines to see what's going on, but this particular example will help because this person has this line, and it is a reading I done for a lady who made a complete change near midlife. She was in her early 40s. She no longer felt that path suited her, so she's made an internal change. The internal change was more towards selfish things, what she wanted for herself. So it was a personal time of change for her. And in that change, she had a loss, I suppose, of her past life was no longer relevant as she took on a new part of her life. And the lifeline continues after the branch in a slightly new direction. And so we'll talk about the outward branch lines in one of the other slides. We'll just move on here now. Okay, talking about change in direction. So if the lifeline, instead of having a normal comfortable curve staying on the same kind of a path, if the line changes direction, forming such a shape as a sudden kink, for instance here it's clashing with the fate line, so it's forming a sudden kind of a kink away. So during that period there is a change, so the life is taking a turn, much like a road takes a turn. So the lifeline is representing that, exactly a change in a different direction. So again, this lifeline takes another turn later on. You can see a sharp curve where it's literally like a left-hand turn, so to speak. It depends which way you look at it. And yeah, so that is representing another time of change during the later years. So that particular age might be in their 70s. So because there's a second lifeline here, a sister line, that can represent for a period that the person is living two separate lives. It could be somebody who has two homes. They may have one home in one country, another one in another, and they may travel between the two. And the sign here that there is a branch towards that other line, showing that there's a connection between those two lives. So the person might be, for instance, if it's a famous person as an example, might have their famous lifestyle, and they might have their being at home quiet lifestyle. And then eventually, as they begin to age, the line takes a sudden turn where they probably spend more time at home. That would be the sign of retirement. Now, the other thing that I mentioned, that I often see this marking the same at the start of the lifeline as well as down the bottom. And most of these people have left their country of birth. So it's a sign of one lifeline representing the original country of birth, and the second part of the lifeline representing the new country of birth. So in some cases, we look at these lines as to what happened early in life. It can represent the split family, it can represent leaving the birth country, and even though this is representing more of the later years, in some cases, after discussing it with the person, we discover that they have actually left their birth country, and it's almost like a symbol rather than any sort of a prediction, just a symbol of leaving their birth country. But keep in mind that everyone's situation is different. So like mentioned before, it may represent many different things, but the most simplest reading for these two lines is that there are two separate lives, and there is a connection between those two separate lives. The person is living two alternate lifestyles, most likely. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we're talking about the island on the lifeline. This is very talked about a lot, and people have a panic about it because it looks like something a little bit uncertain. So the island needs to be clearly the line splitting and then joining back again. So be careful not to confuse just other crossing lines as an island. And primarily that indicates interruptions to life or disruptions. They don't have to be negative. They can be positive changes, such as period when someone is having children or getting married. So their lifestyle is changing and their life may be split into like two directions. So something is interrupting there for a period. And it's these interruptions that show up on our palms like this, and it often is a mark that's been there for a long time. That kind of represents more like a fated mark if it's so permanent. In most cases, these people might have temporarily diverted from their main path. That splitting is showing a split in the direction of their goals. Always look at the fate line, which runs up the center of the palm. Always look at that for clues as to what might be going on. So if this in the middle of the life is showing, for instance, around the age 40 here, and if on the fate line, for instance, if the fate line stops for a period in the center of the palm, that might be indicating that during that period the person might be unemployed, for instance, because the career line is missing. So that might be hinting that that island is representing to do with the career. And what some people say that this island represents is someone who has a predisposition to a mental disease such as depression or alcoholism, things like that. It may be someone who is going through hormonal changes like menopause, things like that. It could be PTSD, a period of conflict, even distortions, emotional distortions for a period. It could be regarding communications with their partners, for instance, so a period of difficult relationships. So for that, you would look at the heart line to see what the heart line is doing, and the heart line is the uppermost horizontal crease, and if that has disturbance on it at the same age, so it would be around about the middle of the heart line, if there are a couple of drooping branches, for instance, and if there are markings on the marriage lines, which are under the pinky on the side, if there are disturbances there, if there are stress lines that reach all the way from the thumb across to the marriage line, then this island may well represent emotional problems. So it may be a problem in the marriage during that period. And I have heard some palm readers talk about the island representing knee trouble, someone who may have weak knees or a period where they have problem with their knees. And I have had that confirmed a couple of times, but not enough times to confirm that the island can represent knee problems. Right, we will talk about where the island sits on the line as to what it might potentially mean. We'll go on to the next slide. And here I've drawn areas where potentially some of the islands may be on the lifeline. Not likely to have someone with an island on every section of their lifeline like this, but just as an example. And just remember that lines do and can change a lot. It's the fingerprints that don't change, and that's another module altogether on fingerprints. But as far as the palm lines, they can change, and they do change according to people's circumstances. Someone might have no line in the middle of the palm all their life, and then suddenly a line turns up in the middle of the palm, for instance, or that line might disappear, for instance. So just keep in mind that these lines are in constant change according to the person's affairs. But we're talking about the island, so when it appears at the very beginning, we look at the age. Could be from 0 right through to, well, depends on the size of the island. So let's look at this island size. We would be judging this island is from 0 to say 10 to 12 years of age. And also keep in mind and look carefully to see if it is an island, because it's common to have this a connecting line from the headline here to the lifeline. So the connecting line would just show security of family and a more cautious personality. So not being an island, but just a connecting line. But if it definitely is an island, then that may suggest that early in life the person may have struggled with some illness or some other difficulty early in life. And the island down a little bit further, if we do some math on the timing, so it's more likely to be from, say, the age of 15 right through to, say 21, 22, and depending on the size of the island again as to how long this period is. But for that age group, many people are going through changes like hormonal changes. It can represent, becoming an adult, so may have trouble during that phase of moving from being a child to adulthood. It can also represent other changes in life. So always look at other clues, like is there a travel line emanating out of the lifeline? Is there other marks? Is there health line problems? So the health line is, we'll talk about that more in a different video, but the health line is the one that rises towards the pinky from around the lifeline area. And if there's issues around this line, if it's very crisscrossed or very lined, that's showing that there potentially may be or may have been some health problems early in life. Now I've made a big mess there. Clean that off. Okay, so for the next one, and if we time this island, it would be around the age of 35 to 40. And most people are well into their career by that age. So it most likely be stress related. There may be worry lines around the mark. So if there's worry lines emanating from the thumb towards it, that's indicating it's just a stressful period, because they may have a lot going on. They may have their career, their family, everything is going on at the same time. So it may be divided energy from just general lifestyle. And that's probably the most common place to have the island. Again, look for clues on the fate line to see what's happening. Is the fate line faded around the same age? And for around 35 to 40, we would be talking about where the fate line crosses the headline is around about the 35 to 40 age. And if it's emotionally related, we would again look at the heart line, and we would look at if these stress lines reach further than the lifeline. If they reach towards the heart line, that's literally pointing, saying, hey, this is where the issue is. It's pointing towards of an emotional nature. Another common place for the island is past halfway, which is around the 50 to 55 age. Mostly see this on women, so I can point it to a period of hormonal change again. So rather than the early island of becoming an adult, so now it's changing from being in like a regular cycle to a slightly uncertain, a bit more hectic kind of a cycle. And for some people, they're just going through the change of life. So they're making decisions and their energy may be divided for those decisions. Now, the last one at the very base of the lifeline, that is more likely to point to in the later years. So that could be representing a period when there is low energy. The energy is divided, but it's making life a lot slower. Well, people tend to slow down as they retire, so that could represent a period of retirement, but it can also represent the divided energy into the family. For instance, being a grandparent and then being your own life, so having that split energy for that period. So just remember to always check for other indicators such as the skin color, consistency of the flesh, you know, whether there's lots of energy, how are the mounts looking, is there's other marks, other areas of the palm. And remember that to back up any possible health issues, should always consult a qualified medical practitioner. Palmistry does not specifically diagnose any specific things, so it's not a reliable indicator of any diseases or anything like that. Okay, let's move on to the new slide. Now we're looking at more of the marks on the lifeline, and the list that I have on the right here is from my book, and they as in these marks can be found on other lines, not just the lifeline, and they have a similar meaning. So the fork being a decision or divided energy, a spot or a dot can relate to sudden tension or sudden stress. Now let me explain. The dot is not a mole, and it's not usually on the mount. The dot being on the actual line, it sometimes looks like an indent, like a pencil colored, like a lead pencil dot, or yeah, more like a little hole almost. So these dots can represent a sudden trauma, no matter which line that they are on. Fraying and tasseling is a scattered energy. Chaining is low vitality or nervous energy. We talked about the chained line earlier. And breaks are change and uncertainty. Breaks, no matter if they're overlapping or not. A cross is an obstacle of a temporary kind. And the square is protection during a difficult period. So like here in the picture on the left, we have a short line on the inside of the lifeline, we have one on the outside, and there's usually some random lines that form a sort of a square. It's very rarely a perfect square, but what it's doing, it's covering a weak section of the line. So for instance, if there was a period that was quite difficult for the person, this square is protection. And it may even mean that that difficult period was averted, so it never happened after all. So it's like healing lines. It's like it wasn't something that was going to be fated, and then it's not fated because the person was protected somehow from their decisions. Grills, we will talk a lot more about grills later on, but the grill is uncertainty because it's like makes the line not clear. And the triangles are a boost. So if the triangle is on its own, not made up by other lines, so if it's like a flag, like literally a tag made by little lines on the lifeline, they're a boost in energy, usually to do with financial status. So check the fate line. So on the fate line, for instance, if the tag is down the lower part of the lifeline, it's talking beyond age 50. So on the fate line, beyond age 50 is after the fate line crosses the heart line. And so you would look at the fate line and see what is going on here regarding the career or life, and why is there a potential financial boost. So on the fate line, what you might see is a branch line that rises along it. It's normally a finer line, and that represents like an achievement. It would be like an achievement line, and it can also represent another avenue. Say if the person is in business, it might represent another avenue for that person that brings a financial boost. And that tag can be on the inside or outside of the line. So if it's on the inside, it's more likely related to family, such as inheritance. If it's on the outside, it's more likely to represent the career life. Now, the star is similar to a cross, but a little bit more sudden, a little bit more shocking. So it's also has to be on its own. It's not to be made up by other lines like the stress line or another ambition line and other potential lines that might cross its path. It always is, a star is made up of its own lines, and that is still temporary. Obstacle, it can be something that comes suddenly, like some kind of an accident or illness that comes suddenly. But because the line continues, it means it is also a temporary experience. Now, the rising branches that come from the lifeline on the inside are called achievement lines, and they suggest an ambitious time period. Maybe a positive achievement such as finishing the studies and getting your degree or diploma or whatever. So many people have these on the outside of the lifeline. And we talked about the drooping branch already at the start. So that can depict more focusing on the self. So your energy going towards your own needs at that time. And the branches on the outside of the lifeline that emanate towards the Mount of Moon, they represent travel. So potential travel, unless there's lots of them, that's another meaning. We'll talk about that soon. But in this case, a single line emanating out of the lifeline is a sign of more than likely travel, as in long distance travel. The shorter the branch, the shorter the travel. Okay, so the other mark that I haven't drawn on here is literally just a bar line. So if there's I'll draw it up here near the star. So if it's just a single line by itself, that's causing an obstacle. So it's called an obstacle line, and that might represent a pause in any part of the life, career, etc. Okay, let's move on and see what other picture we have. Okay, the tassels. Yeah, so a hand that has many of these tassel-y kind of lines, they belongs to someone with nervous energy. So some people have them all over the palm like spider webs. So that means that in general they have a lot of nervous energy and they're sensitive to everything around them. They worry a lot, and they might even look for problems where there is no problems. So I'm here just talking about these fine lines at the end of the lifeline that look like feathery tassels, and that means that the energy of the lifeline has weakened, that instead of that continuous just one direction line, there's all this energy leaving the line. So that can represent health issues. It can indicate a tiredness, period of confusion. Look to the headline. If there's an island there, it can also reflect what's going on in the lifeline. So the mind might be a little bit numb. Might be a period where you struggle remembering stuff. You might be starting to lose your memory during that period as well. So if it's health related, look at the health lines, which are around this area where I've just circled. If that area is full of spiderweb lines as well, then that's pointing to potential health in like stomach, probably stomach related and things like that. But again, please don't rely on palmistry for health diagnosis. Okay, I'll bring the next picture up for you. Here we are. This is a fuzzy or faded section of the line, which represents a period of struggle similar to the island. And these fuzzy sections can come quite suddenly, like one minute that your line looks okay, and then you might wait a couple of months and then you see this area that's looking a bit fuzzy. Usually a couple of years for this line to become proper fuzzy, faded looking. It might take a couple of years, but it's an indicator that something has happened in the course of this person's life to make their life difficult for that period. So let's look at this hand as an example. So the lifeline starts looking nice and smooth and then stops. So because it stops like that, that's showing there is a change in the lifeline. The lifeline continues from this direction, which is showing that the person took a different direction in life, more than likely in their early years, somewhere in their 20s, right up to like where it actually starts. So that could be I would say 25, 30, let me have a quick look. Yeah, it could be in this case, because 40 would be about there. You'd be looking at from 20 to 25 or so. Now, so this area after that becomes all light looking and faded. That means that the following 10 or so years are probably not the way things used to be. So it may be multiple things. I've seen this mark on a person who was imprisoned. So because while they were in prison, they were not doing a lot. They were literally the quiet, very quiet life, just reading, doing the usual things, doing the right thing while they were imprisoned, but obviously not making a great impact on their life. So the lifeline didn't have a great impact on the palm either. So then when they were released from jail, the lifeline comes back to being strong again. Now, I was talking about another person, not this palm in particular. This person did not have any jail time, but this person also went through just a difficult period. Now, showing where to have a look and see that this change is actually happening on the other lines, we look at the fate line. Obviously, because that also shows our direction, the fate line in the middle here, you can see it's quite dark and then it starts to get a bit weaker, but it also shifts over. It stops over here, but it continues from a new spot over here. So the fate line has changed position exactly like the lifeline has. So it shows that direction has changed, and after that direction it continues in a different manner. And another line that connects from the head and the heart line is acting kind of like an obstacle line there later on, but that's another lesson regarding that. But for now, we are just talking about this fuzzy section. Now, because this fuzzy section may have just appeared after some period of time, at the same time it can heal as well. So if a few years go by, like for instance, if this person now starts living their life and, you know, following their goals, living the dream, whatever they might be doing, this fuzzy area can heal itself, like it no longer shows up as what happened in the past, especially if that's on the dominant hand. If that's on the non-dominant hand, it may always stay there as a mark, but very rarely are these faded sections a permanent marking. Okay, so next I will show you an example. It's difficult to get hand pictures of famous people, but I have this particular example of a famous rapper who was jailed age 16, very young. They were jailed for drug-related issues, and they did a whole of 6 months, which is not very long. But I want to quickly show you something very interesting, because this is a famous rapper. He's got a lot of money now, and he's done really well for himself and continues to do so. But I want to just show you this lifeline on his left hand. I wonder if this yellow will work if I draw on it. Yes. So I'm drawing this yellow line where the lifeline starts, and there's a big break. A big break. And that's early in life. A big change. What's happened there early in life is not specifically indicating time in jail, because it was only 6-month period, but it's showing a big change. So that person went through a huge transformation. I'd say the time in jail affected them. And the way I know that is this line that comes from the inside of the lifeline, crosses over the broken section of the heart line, broken section of the lifeline, and reaches to the heart line. That line is showing that this change, this thing that happened to him, going through whatever illegal drug-related things he was doing, changed his life. He had an emotional epiphany, so to speak. Maybe that was the time that he decided that he needs to change. The jail time would have changed him. He would have had this heartfelt moment. It points directly to his passion for life, which would have been not just rapping, but making people understand what might have, gone in people's lives. So communicating those emotional things. So the thing that shows that he's very passionate, creative type person is this curved. The curved heart line is quite deep, but the headline is not. There's a very weak headline, which probably represents his early period of not doing the right thing because he wasn't thinking correctly in as far as making proper decisions. His decisions were emotionally based because of his strong heart line. And looking at the rest of his hand, you can see how much creative energy he has also based on this size of this mount of moon. He's got quite a big curve on the edge of the palm and lots of physical energy based on the ball thumb. His fingertips look quite puffy. If you look at that index finger, you can see the puffiness on the side of it. That's some obsessive tendencies, and that can happen to many creative people or athletes, somebody who's constantly obsessing over one thing or another, no matter what it is. So you can get slightly more puffy fingertips. Often a sign on wealthy people too. So, but the main thing I wanted to point out here was the fact that his lifeline was broken at the very early start. That showed his jail time. The fact that he would have had an epiphany at some point early in life pointed to a heartfelt decision, and his lifeline also clashes with his fate line down here, and that would be around about the age in his 40s, so they may have even become even more career orientated. And I've got another example for you as well, quite exciting. I'll give you a new picture. It's actually only a handprint. This is the handprint of Ted Bundy. If you haven't heard of Ted Bundy, he was a murderer who was found guilty. He actually admitted to many murders in his trial, and he in the end was executed by electrocution around age 42, which, by the way, there is no sign of his death on the palm, because you can't tell exact point of somebody's death on a palm, but it definitely shows his personality, and surprisingly everything looks normal, but when you put everything together, it does bring a bit of a picture of his nature. Now, he was known to be very intelligent and obviously very passionate. You look at his heart line. We will talk about heart lines later on, but this kind of a heart line is a very passionate heart line. His lifeline, at the start, there are many stress lines at the start, and it's almost like a grid. So he had a difficult childhood. His lifeline is connected heavily to his headline, and the lifeline is quite weak. His headline is even weaker. So that shows everything that he did was a passionate move, a passionate decision. It was not logical. There was no what do you call it, empathy or anything logical going on. His headline is so weak, and it's also broken, so it shows that he has changed his way of thinking at a certain time. Now I'll cross out some of those marks. Now the lifeline here, even though it's a handprint, I know from experience that once the lifeline shows up as a big white thick line, it means that that line was thickened and it was a hazy line. So for a long period of his life, he was and was going to be not very clear-headed. He had an issue. He had problems. So these problems are also shown by the constant, the stress lines go all the way. He's under stress all the time. But he was so clever at hiding that from the public that you know, it was a surprise when he was actually found out. So I've talked about his broken headline. Okay, here is the typical sign of fame is a star on the Mount of Apollo. He has a star on the Mount of Apollo. However, yes, he was famous, but he was famous for the wrong things. So obviously, a star can be good, can be bad. But in this case, the star is bad, and based on where it's placed, even that star is not representing his execution, because that star is on a mount, not specifically on any line. Now, the only thing that I did notice that he does have that stands out, potentially pointing towards his execution, is that he had a sister line, not very clear here, but he had a sister line along his lifeline, which only makes it to sort of halfway. At the same time, he had this huge line that comes from the thumb towards that sister line and sort of stops at the sister line. That's called the loyalty line, and usually it shows a loyalty to a certain tribe or family, like super obsessively. So what he had loyalty to, who knows. Okay, so his fingers, we would have talked about that in the previous lessons. He's got some low set fingers here. The pinky is low set, so that's showing potentially some difficulty early in life. He has a crooked pinky, and that can be his ability to bend the truth. He can convince people in a very clever way, basically lying. He has bulbous finger of the ring finger, the Apollo. It's quite bulbous, so that's showing a lot of passion there as well. But his index finger is quite pointed and much shorter. So he had a lot of masculine energy, but he's very intuitive. The pointy index finger shows his intuition. His thumb was quite bulbous, and that's his aggression coming out. The bulbous, he didn't have the classic murderous thumb, but it was quite bulbous. So that shows that short, quick temper that he would have had. Okay, so lastly, the thing that I noticed with his lifeline is that it is not at all grounded. The lifeline is not grounded through the fate line. It's not grounded in itself. It ends up in many tassels towards the end with some interfering lines as well. So that's showing that he was basically a freedom-loving person who did not have a care for tradition or his family roots. His roots were quite weak in family, and that was true in the case of his early life. Okay, that's the end of that example and the end of lesson 4. I hope you have enjoyed this learning, and I look forward to your next lesson. Bye.